What if a single misread face changes everything? What if the king looks upon a boy he has never met and sees only what he wishes to see? A strong jaw, dark eyes, the particular set of a brow that whispers of blood shared and debts owed. What if that misreading, that private and drunken conviction, becomes the stone that redirects the river? The column arrives at Winterfell on a gray morning, the kind that settles over the north like a held breath. The king's party stretches back along the King's Road for nearly a mile. Wagons, horses, banners snapping in the cold wind. The gold and black of House Baratheon rippling against skies the color of old iron. Robert Baratheon rides at the head of it all, enormous and loud, already red-faced from the road and the wine that has accompanied him across half the continent. He is not yet entirely the ruin he will become, but the ruin is visible if one knows where to look. In the breadth of his chest, still formidable. In his eyes, still hunting for something that left him long ago. The gates of Winterfell open. The Starks assemble in the yard, all duty and northern reserve. Ned stands at the front, and beside him, his household gathers. His lady wife, his children, his ward, his servants, and one other. A boy of perhaps 8 years, standing slightly apart from the trueborn children, dark-haired and watchful. Jon Snow. Robert dismounts. He embraces Ned with the force of a man who does not understand his own strength anymore, who uses his body the way he once used his warhammer. Without precision, but with absolute conviction. He is speaking already, filling the yard with his voice, commanding food and wine and the crypts, demanding to see Lyanna. And Ned, who carries the weight of Lyanna's secret like a stone sewn inside his chest, guides him gently, carefully, away from the assembled household. But not before Robert's eyes find the boy. He stops mid-sentence. It is a small thing. No one who is not watching very carefully would notice it. But Ned notices. Ned always notices. Robert's gaze moves over Jon Snow the way a man's hand moves over a familiar sword hilt. Not searching exactly, but recognizing. The boy has the look of someone Robert has seen before, or believes he has. The jaw, the dark hair, the stillness, which Robert will later reinterpret as dignity. Robert does not say anything, not yet. He allows the moment to pass, moves on, fills the silence with noise, but the calculation has already begun behind those bloodshot eyes. Near the trident, he is thinking. There were women near the trident. There were weeks he does not remember clearly. Weeks blurred by victory and grief, and the particular recklessness of young men who have just survived something enormous. There was, he is now certain, a woman. He does not remember her face. He does not remember her name. He does not need to. The boy is standing in a northern lord's yard, and he looks like a Baratheon, and that is enough. What if certainty requires no evidence? What if the king's conviction is its own proof? Ned watches Robert's expression and understands what is happening with a precision that is almost physical. A cold hand closing around something vital. He says nothing. This is the first choice, and it is the most consequential one he will make in this story, without speaking a single word. He could correct the assumption now, gently in the yard, before it takes root. He could say the boy is his, that the matter is settled, that there's nothing more to discuss. He has said these things before. He knows how to say them. He does not say them, because something shifts in the calculus. If Robert believes Jon is his, if Robert, King of the Seven Kingdoms, claims the boy as his own bastard blood, then no one will come looking for the Targaryen underneath. No one will see the silver thread that runs through the boy's lineage. Ned looks at his king, and he sees, in the same moment, a threat dissolving and a new danger forming. And he cannot yet be certain which is larger. So he stays silent, and the silence becomes a kind of architecture. That night, the great hall of Winterfell fills with warmth and noise. Robert drinks more than he should, which is to say, he drinks exactly as much as he always does. He calls Ned to sit close. He speaks of the old days. He speaks of Lyanna. He speaks of loyalty, of blood, of what a man owes the children he scatters across the realm like seeds thrown on uncertain ground. He does not finish this particular sentence. He does not need to. Cersei sits at the far end of the table, watching her husband with the expression of someone who has learned to read weather patterns in a face. She is already calculating. She is always already calculating. And then Robert stands, cup raised, and the hall falls quiet. His voice carries the full weight of a man who has never doubted his own authority, who mistakes volume for legitimacy, and has never been sufficiently corrected. "The boy," he says, "Jon Snow, he is mine." The hall does not move. Ned's hand tightens around his goblet, the metal pressing cold into his palm. Cersei's eyes find Ned across the length of the room, and in them is a question that has not yet found its full shape, but will. The question that lives behind Cersei's eyes does not wait long to become something more dangerous than a question. It becomes a project. It becomes, in the language she has always preferred, a campaign. But the boy arrives first. That is the sequence that matters. Jon Snow arrives in King's Landing before Cersei's suspicions can be organized into weapons, and what arrives with him is something the capital has never quite encountered in this precise combination: northern reticence, wrapped in a young man's body, discipline worn like second skin, and eyes that take the full measure of the Red Keep's gilded excess, without flinching and without wonder. He does not gape at the height of the walls. He does not stare at the servants or the banners or the sheer accumulated weight of Lannister gold pressed into every surface. He looks at all of it the way a soldier looks at terrain, cataloging, filing, moving on. Robert sees this and feels something he cannot name, something adjacent to pride, but older and more complicated. He watches Jon cross the yard on that first morning and makes the decision quickly, the way he has always made decisions, loudly, irrevocably, without sufficient consideration of consequence. Jon will train with the princes. Jon will stand in the yards of the Red Keep alongside Joffrey and Tommen and learn the sword and the shield under the same masters who have shaped or attempted to shape the heirs of the Iron Throne. Robert declares this at breakfast. Robert declares this as though it is a kindness. He does not think to ask whether it is also a cruelty. It is immediately a cruelty. Not to Jon. Joffrey is not prepared for what stands beside him in the yard when the first morning of training arrives. He is not prepared for stillness. He is not prepared for the quiet economy of someone who learned to move before he learned to speak, who was handed a practice sword in Winterfell's gray cold when his hands were still small, and taught that the body is an instrument to be tuned and maintained, rather than a thing to be indulged. Joffrey trains like someone who expects to be watched. Jon trains like someone who expects to survive. The difference is not subtle. The masters see it within the first hour. The other boys see it within the first morning. Joffrey sees it by midday, and the expression that crosses his face is not the expression of someone who intends to learn from the experience. Tommen is different. Tommen watches Jon with a soft, cautious curiosity. The way a child watches something unfamiliar that is not yet proven threatening. He does not try to match him, he simply tries to understand him, which is already a more sophisticated response than his brother is capable of. Jon notices this. Jon, who has learned to catalog everything about a space he occupies, who has spent his life reading the temperature of rooms with a precision born of necessity, notices Tommen's careful attention and returns it with something approaching gentleness. It is the only softness anyone sees in him in those first weeks. He is harder with everyone else, not cruel. Simply contained, the way the North is contained, vast and cold, and operating according to rules that the South has never fully troubled itself to learn. Cersei watches all of this from a careful distance, and the project behind her eyes accelerates. She knows Robert's bastards. This is not a boast. It is simply a fact. The way the dimensions of a battlefield are facts. Things a general knows not from love of the subject, but from the absolute necessity of knowing them. She has counted them, located them, assessed each one for the threat they represent or fail to represent. She knows their mothers, their ages, the windows of time during which Robert's movements make their existence possible. She knows, with the particular precision of someone whose survival has always depended on knowing where Robert was and when. She sets her network to the question quietly. She does not ask it herself. She never asks questions herself when she can have someone smaller and more expendable ask them on her behalf. What comes back is absence. The records of Robert's movements in the relevant years are not unclear. They are merely inconvenient. There is no journey near the North. There's no stop near the Vale. There's no time frame that bends comfortably enough to accommodate the math of Jon Snow's existence as Robert's blood. Cersei receives this information the way she receives most useful things, in private, without visible reaction, while her hands remain perfectly still in her lap. She sits with it. She turns it. She considers what it means that Robert has claimed a boy who cannot, by any logical accounting, be his. It means someone is lying. It means the lie is large. It means Ned Stark, dutiful, honorable, infuriatingly trustworthy Ned Stark, is at the center of it. She does not yet know why. She does not yet know what is being protected. But she knows the shape of concealment well enough to recognize it from across a room, and what she has seen in Ned's careful silences and tightened hands since Robert's declaration in the hall has the precise shape of a man carrying something he cannot afford to drop. She is still sitting with this understanding when Tyrion finds her in the corridor outside her solar, and the look that passes between them. Brief, asymmetrical, charged with the specific current of two people who trust each other only because they share a name and understand the alternative, carries something neither of them chooses to speak aloud. Tyrion walks on. He has his own interest in the boy from the North, and his interests rarely align with his sister's, except when they do, which is always more dangerous than when they do not. He has been watching Jon Snow since the third day. He watches most things, which is the privilege and the survival mechanism of someone who learned early that he would never be allowed to participate in the world the same way other people participate. That the yard would always be closed to him, that the battlefield would always be metaphorical, that his weapons would always be the ones made of language and patience, and the ability to wait while other people exhaust themselves swinging swords they barely understand. If you are enjoying this Jon Snow timeline, please consider subscribing because I upload new Westeros stories every single day. Now let's continue with the story. Tyrion watches, and what he has seen in Jon Snow is something he has not expected to see in someone who arrived from the north wearing grief like a second cloak. He has seen intelligence, not the intelligence of books, though the boy can read and read seriously. The intelligence of someone who understands at some foundational level that the world is not what it presents itself as being. That surfaces deceive. That what is said and what is meant are almost never the same sentence. He finds Jon in the library on a gray afternoon when the rain is doing what King's Landing rain does, arriving half-heartedly, neither committing to a proper storm nor resolving itself into clear sky. Jon sits at a table with a volume he is not quite reading, his eyes somewhere past the page, in the particular middle distance that belongs to people doing the real work of thinking, while their bodies occupy a visible space to satisfy expectation. Tyrion sits across from him without asking. He has never particularly believed in asking. He sets a cup of wine on the table between them. One cup, not two, because he is not, despite appearances, trying to be kind. And he says, without preamble, because preamble is for people who lack confidence in their conclusions, that a bastard in this court is a word, and a word can be used against someone the way a blade can be used against someone, and the only reliable defense against a word is having better words. Jon looks at him across the table. The look is long and even, and carries no performance in it whatsoever. He does not pretend the observation is new to him. He does not pretend it is unwelcome. He says simply that he has been told to keep his head down. Tyrion considers this. He picks up his wine. He says that keeping one's head down is excellent advice for someone who expects the trouble to pass overhead. It is less excellent advice for someone standing in a room where the trouble is coming from every direction simultaneously. He pauses. He looks at Jon the way he looks at most things he finds genuinely interesting, with the full weight of attention that other people usually reserve for things that can benefit them directly. And then he says that what Jon needs is not a lower profile. What Jon needs is a better understanding of the game being played around him, because the game is already being played whether Jon chooses to participate or not, and the only difference between a player and a piece is whether the person in question knows the rules. Jon is quiet for a moment. The rain moves against the windows with its half-committed rhythm. Then he says he would like to understand the rules, and Tyrion, who has not smiled at something unironically in longer than he can easily calculate, allows himself something in that vicinity. Because the boy from the north, whoever he actually is, whatever blood actually runs in him, beneath the name Robert has claimed with his drinking cup raised in that crowded hall, the boy is paying attention. He is already paying attention in the way that only certain people are capable of, the ones for whom the world has never been soft enough to permit the luxury of looking away. Somewhere in the upper corridors of the Red Keep, Cersei reads the latest word from her informants and sets the parchment down with a care that is almost gentle. She has a new question now, sharper and more specific than the one she carried into the night of Robert's declaration. Not whether Jon Snow is Robert's. She is nearly certain now that he is not. The question that has found its full shape at last is something colder and more consequential entirely. If he is not Robert's, then whose is he? And why has Ned Stark, a man who has never in his public life told a lie significant enough to matter, constructed this particular one with such evident and desperate care. Cersei does not panic. This is the first and most essential thing to understand about her. Where other women of her position might feel the cold creep of fear at the edge of a dangerous discovery, she feels instead something closer to clarification, the clean, almost satisfying sensation of a fog beginning to lift. She has lived her entire life inside systems designed by men who believed she could not read them, and she has spent that life reading nothing else. What she holds now, in the quiet of her apartments with the candles burning low, and Pycelle's cramped handwriting spread across her table like a map of someone else's ruin, is not yet proof. But proof has never been what she required. She requires only the shape of a thing, and the shape of this particular thing is becoming very clear. Pycelle has brought her the record she asked for, with the obedient nervousness of a man who knows better than to ask why. Lyanna Stark's disappearance, Rhaegar Targaryen's movements through the realm in the months before the war, the timing of certain absences, certain silences in the correspondence of houses that should have been vocal. She cross-references these against the age of the boy, against the geography of where Ned Stark claims to have fathered him, and when against the duration of the war itself. The numbers, arranged properly, tell a story that no one in the Red Keep has thought to tell themselves, or rather, a story that one person thought to tell with enormous care, constructing it brick by deliberate brick over the course of years, knowing that a lie believed long enough becomes indistinguishable from history. The alchemist she employs separately, discreetly, through channels that bypass the usual household staff entirely. He is a small man with sharp eyes who asks only what he is paid to ask, and what she pays him to confirm is simpler than it appears. She wants to know what a child of Targaryen blood and Stark blood might carry in the bone structure of the face, in certain physical tendencies, in certain documented inheritances. The alchemist is not a Meister. He is something more useful, a man who traffics in the kind of knowledge that never appears in official records, precisely because it has too many uses. He gives her a list. She reads it once, then sets it beside Pycelle's documents and reads them both together. The boy has gray eyes. Stark gray, everyone has said. And she granted them that, because the gray was the most visible thing, and gray is what a man sees when he is not looking for anything else. But she has also received, through a different informant, a description of something observed 3 weeks prior in the training yard. The way the boy stands when he is pushed beyond his comfort. The way he recovers from a blow. Not the Stark way, which is grinding and enduring, but something quicker, more instinctive, with a certain quality of pride that has no patience for the ground. Rhaegar Targaryen was described in a dozen different accounts as possessing that quality. That specific, almost elegant refusal to stay fallen. She closes the documents. She sits for a long time in the silence. She does not yet decide what to do with what she knows. This is deliberate. A weapon drawn too early is a weapon that has been seen, and she has not survived this long by drawing early. She files the knowledge away in the same interior space where she keeps all her most dangerous things, the things that have no immediate function, but will one day become necessary in ways she cannot yet entirely predict. For now, the question of Jon Snow's true parentage is hers alone. That exclusivity has value. She will not squander it. What she will do, what she is already doing, because Cersei does not wait for certainty before beginning, is watch the boy more carefully. Not with suspicion that could be read on her face, but with the specific measuring attention of someone cataloging an asset for future deployment or destruction. Both possibilities remain open. A Targaryen heir, secret and unconfirmed, in the household of the king who hunted Targaryens to extinction. This is a blade with two edges, and she has not yet determined which edge serves her better. It is in this same week that she becomes aware, through the particular sensitivity she has developed to Robert's moods, that her husband is becoming fond of the boy in a way that is more than ceremonial. Not the distant, performative warmth of a king acknowledging a claimed son, but something genuine and almost uncomfortable in its openness. She watches Robert in the great hall, watches the way his laughter changes when Jon is near. Louder, less performed, with a quality she has not heard from him in years, something that resembles relief. He claps the boy on the shoulder, and his hand lingers. He speaks to Jon about battles with a seriousness he has not used with any of their children, including Joffrey, who flinches from the weight of his father's expectations without ever understanding why they have been placed there. And Joffrey does flinch. Cersei sees this too. She sees the precise moment her eldest son registers his father's preference and what it does to the architecture behind his eyes. It is, she thinks, a problem that is growing faster than she anticipated. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city's politics, in the quieter, lower-lit corridors where information is currency and sentiment is overhead, Ned Stark has made a decision that he will almost immediately regret. Ned Stark has made a decision. Not a decision born of peace or clarity, but one dragged up from the place where all terrible necessities live. That airless chamber beneath reason, where a man confronts what survival actually requires. He has run the calculation 100 times over the course of 100 sleepless nights, and the answer does not change. Cersei Lannister is close. She is too intelligent, too patient, and too motivated to remain close forever. The moment she crosses from suspicion into certainty, Jon Snow is already dead. The boy simply would not know it yet. This is the logic that walks Ned Stark to Robert's solar in the deep hours of the night, when the Red Keep has settled into its groaning, torch-guttered silence, and the guards at the corridor's end have been sent on a fabricated errand that will occupy them long enough. He does not carry a document. He does not carry proof. He carries only the truth, which has always been heavier than either. Robert is awake. This is not surprising. Robert is often awake at this hour, though rarely for reasons that would flatter him. Wine and restlessness, and the particular insomnia of men who rule things they never wanted. He looks up when Ned enters, registers the expression on his oldest friend's face, and puts down the cup. He does not speak. He waits, which is something Robert Baratheon does very rarely and very badly. But tonight, something in Ned's bearing commands it. What Ned says next will rearrange the world. He begins at the beginning. Not the beginning of Jon's life, but the beginning that matters most to Robert. Lyanna, the tourney at Harrenhal, the way Rhaegar Targaryen rode past every highborn woman in the realm and crowned a girl from the north with winter roses, the way Robert had laughed at it then, as though a dragon's son could never truly threaten what he and Lyanna had between them. Ned does not embellish this. He lets it sit. Then he continues, the Tower of Joy. What he found there, what Lyanna made him swear with the last breath available to her, her blood already staining the petals of those same roses, or near enough. He does not spare Robert the details. They are not a kindness he is permitted to offer tonight. He tells Robert what the boy is, not who. What? The legitimate son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, born of a secret marriage conducted under the rites of the faith, making Jon not a bastard, but an heir. By Targaryen reckoning, the heir, the last ember of a dynasty Robert spent a war extinguishing. He tells Robert this, and he watches the king's face, and what moves across it is something almost geological in its violence. Robert stands. The cup falls. He does not notice it fall. He crosses the distance between them in 3 strides, and his hands are at Ned's collar before thought has caught up to movement, and what comes out of him is not a word so much as a sound, something below language, below fury, in the register where grief and betrayal conduct their oldest arguments. He shakes Ned once, hard enough that the breath leaves him. He says Lyanna's name, and it comes out ruined, torn at the edges in a way that no political calculation could ever prepare a man for. He says it again. He does not finish what he means to say. He does not need to. The silence afterward is enormous. Robert releases Ned and does not step back. He stands in the wreckage of what he has just heard, and Ned watches the grief do what grief does to even the largest men. It makes them briefly small, briefly transparent, briefly visible in ways that power is designed to prevent. Robert is shaking, not with rage now, with something worse. He is realizing in real time that Lyanna chose, that there was no abduction in the way he built his war around, that the girl he loved rode towards something rather than away from it, and that the something was not him, and that she went to her death in a tower in Dorne, having never sent for him, having never wanted to be saved. This is what shatters him, not the heir, not the dynasty, not the Iron Throne, or any of the cold political architecture that will eventually demand his attention. It is this, the specific, unforgiving shape of having been unmourned by someone you spent your entire life mourning. Hours pass. Ned does not move from the room. Robert does not order him to leave. The candles burn lower and the silence changes quality, becomes something inhabited rather than empty, as 2 men who have known each other since boyhood sit inside a truth too large for either of them to carry alone. When Robert finally speaks again, his voice is flat and stripped of its usual performance. He does not look at Ned. He asks if anyone else knows. Ned tells him no. Robert says then that is how it remains. He says this with a quietness more threatening than volume, more absolute than a drawn sword. He does not say what he will do with what he knows. He does not say what becomes of Jon now, or what becomes of the claim, or what becomes of any of it. He only says that no one else learns this, not tonight, not until he has decided what the truth is worth. He pours himself another cup with a hand that it's not quite steady, and Ned watches the king's eyes go somewhere else entirely, somewhere back and north and full of winter roses. The king does not sleep that night. This is the first calculation. He sits with it the way a general sits with a map before a battle he has not yet decided to fight, tracing lines, measuring distances, counting what can be lost and what can never be recovered. Robert Baratheon has never been a subtle man. His court knows this. His enemies have counted on it. But there is a version of Robert that exists only in the hours before dawn, in rooms where no one is watching. And that version is considerably more dangerous than the one who laughs too loudly and drinks too deeply and lets the world believe he governs by appetite alone. That version thinks. That version plans. That version understands with a clarity that would surprise everyone who has ever underestimated him exactly what a secret is worth and exactly what it costs to keep one. What if the most important decision Robert Baratheon ever makes is not made with a warhammer? What if it is made in silence, with a cup going cold in his hand and a dead woman's face in his thoughts, in the gray hours before the Red Keep stirs and the performance of kingship must begin again? By morning, he has his answer. And the answer, like all answers Robert has ever trusted, is brutal in its simplicity. The boy is his, not by blood, not by the cold mathematics of parentage that masters record and lords dispute in dusty halls, but by decision. By the only currency Robert has ever truly believed in, which is will. A king's will. The thing that made him reach across a battlefield and pull a dynasty down with his bare hands. He chose to end the Targaryens once. He chooses now to end this particular truth before it can breathe open air and become a fire he cannot control. Jon is his, Robert Waters, a king's bastard, protected by that name, shielded by that lie, hidden in plain sight behind the blunt armor of the obvious. Let the world look at a black-haired boy with a king's bearing and see exactly what it expects to see. Let it never look harder than that. Let it never need to. This is the bargain Robert makes with himself in the dark. He does not write it down. Writing things down is how secrets become evidence. He does not speak it aloud except once, in a room with one other man, and that man has already made his own peace with the necessary cost. The bargain has no witnesses. It needs none. Robert has always understood that the most binding contracts are the ones made without witnesses. The ones sealed not with wax and signature, but with the specific weight of mutual ruin. With the knowledge that if one man speaks, everything falls, and therefore either man speaks, and therefore the silence holds the shape of stone. What it costs him, he does not allow himself to calculate, not fully. He does allow himself one moment standing at the window in the hour when the sky first goes from black to something darker than blue. When he thinks of Lyanna as he almost never permits himself to, not as absence, not as the hollow where a rebellion began, but as herself. The girl who ran races she was not supposed to run, who rode horses the wrong way, leaning too far forward, laughing, who looked at him once with something in her eyes he had been young and foolish enough to call love, not understanding then what it actually was, which was a polite tolerance for someone she intended to escape. He had been wrong about Lyanna. He had been spectacularly, catastrophically wrong, and 17 years of a marriage made of ice and performance have taught him precisely how wrong. He does not say her name. He has not said her name aloud in years. He does not say it now. But he looks north, where the sky is still dark and the stars are still hard and clear, and something in his chest closes like a door being shut against the cold, and then he turns back to the room, and the decision is finished. The betrothal discussions, the quiet, tentative, politically convenient discussions about Joffrey and a Stark girl, or a Tully, or some lord's daughter useful enough to cement an alliance, are not formally abandoned. They are simply not continued. Robert mentions this to no one directly. He mentions instead, and with considerable energy, the state of his Kingsguard, the question of how young knights are properly formed, the particular virtue of training under someone whose honor has never once been questioned in 30 years of service. He talks about Sir Barristan Selmy the way men talk about things they have already decided. He does not frame it as a question, because it is not one. Barristan is summoned. The conversation is brief. Robert does not explain himself in full. He has never in his life explained himself in full to anyone who did not absolutely require it. But he is clear about what he wants. The boy is to be trained, not housed with the other squires, not treated as an afterthought, trained with the particular care one takes with something that matters, something that has to last. Barristan, whose entire life has been an act of disciplined service so complete it has become indistinguishable from his character, asks no questions about why. He asks only about the boy. What is he like? What does he know already? What does he love? Robert pauses at that last one. He realizes, and not comfortably, that he does not know what Jon loves. He has spoken to the boy a handful of times. He has looked at the boy more than he has spoken to him, the looking having its own unbearable purpose. He knows the boy is quiet. He knows the boy watches. He knows the boy has something in his face that Robert cannot look at directly for very long without feeling a specific kind of grief that has no clean name. He tells Barristan the boy is quick. He tells him the boy is serious beyond his years. He tells him the boy will either be exceptional or will waste what he has been given, and that it is Barristan's charge to ensure the former. Barristan nods once, with the economy of a man who has served kings long enough to understand that sometimes what they say and what they mean are two entirely different things, and that the service is to both. Ned leaves the capital 2 days later. The parting is not warm. It is not cold either. It is something in between, something with the texture of a wound that has been pressed closed before it has properly healed. Holding because of pressure and nothing else, Robert clasps his arm. Ned does not quite meet his eyes. Neither of them speaks about what lives between them now. There is nothing useful to say. The decision has been made. The shape of the future has been sketched, however faintly, and everything that comes after is merely execution. What Robert cannot give Ned is peace. What Ned cannot give Robert is absolution. They have known each other since they were boys shouting across a courtyard at the Eyrie, since before either of them knew what thrones cost, or what love cost, or what silence cost. And none of that knowing helps them now. It perhaps makes it worse. It is easier to bear a burden with a stranger than with someone who remembers who you were before the weight was placed on you. Ned rides north. He rides north, and he does not look back at the city, at the towers, at the window he knows Robert is not standing in. He thinks of Catelyn, who will ask him what passed between himself and the king. He thinks of how he will say simply that old business was settled, that the friendship holds, that there is nothing to concern her. He will say this without flinching because he has practiced saying things without flinching. He has been practicing it for years. He thinks of Robb, who will be glad to have him home. He thinks of his daughters and his ward and the cold, clean air of the north that strips everything down to its necessary essentials. And he thinks, briefly, of Jon, of the boy he will not see again for some time, perhaps a long time, of the boy who will grow up in the shadow of a lie so large it has its own climate, its own weather, its own capacity to reshape everything it touches. He writes nothing down. He has made himself a promise on this. Whatever he thinks, whatever he knows, whatever grief or guilt or complicated loyalty moves through him in the long hours of the night, none of it becomes ink. Ink can be found. Ink can be read by hands other than the ones intended. He has seen what written words do to dynasties. He has seen how a letter can travel across a kingdom and arrive as a death sentence. He trusts the spoken word only as far as the mouths of men he trusts absolutely, and the number of those men has now been reduced to a precise and terrible number. 1. Only one man in the world holds this with him, and that man is the king. And the king has made his choice, and the choice is silence. The horses move steadily north through the afternoon light. The road narrows past the city gates, becomes something older and more honest. Trees pressing in on either side. The sounds of the capital fading until there is only wind and hoofbeats, and the occasional cry of a bird somewhere above. Ned rides at the head of his column, but his mind is elsewhere. In a red keep, in a solar, in the face of a boy who carries a secret in his blood that the boy himself will never know. This is the thing Ned cannot quite settle, not the lie itself. He has made a kind of accommodation with the lie. What he cannot settle is the boy growing up without knowing what he is, what he came from, whose love and whose death made his life possible. He does not finish that thought. He has learned not to finish certain thoughts. Behind him, back in the capital, Jon is brought before Ser Barristan Selmy in the yard of the King's Guard. In the late afternoon, when the light falls long and golden across the practice grounds and the air smells of steel and sawdust, Barristan studies the boy with the quiet attention of a man who has spent a lifetime reading what others cannot see. The set of a shoulder, the weight of a stance, the specific quality of stillness that separates those born to hold a sword from those who merely learn. He sees something in Jon that he does not immediately name, something he has not seen in some years, something that makes him, after a moment, reach for a training sword and hold it out without preamble or ceremony. Jon takes it. His grip is not wrong. This is the first thing. The grip is not wrong, and in Barristan's long experience, the grip is almost always wrong until someone teaches it otherwise. He says nothing yet. He only watches. He asks the boy to show him what he knows, and Jon, who has been brought to this moment by a king's bargain and a dead woman's secret and the weight of a choice made in the dark, raises the blade and shows him. Years pass. This is the nature of courts and of children. Both change without asking permission, and neither change slowly enough for those who watch them. Jon Snow grows. He grows the way certain things grow, not gradually, not incrementally, but in sudden arrivals, so that those who see him daily swear afterward they did not notice until the transformation was already complete. One morning, he is a boy moving through Barristan's drills with careful, earnest attention. The next, he is something else. His shoulders broaden. His footwork acquires that particular economy of motion that cannot be taught, only uncovered in someone who already carries it dormant in the blood. Barristan does not praise him often. This is, in itself, a form of praise. The men who train under Barristan Selmy know that silence is the closest thing to a compliment the old knight regularly offers, and so, when Barristan watches Jon move through the forms and says nothing for long minutes in the late afternoon light, the squires along the fence rail begin to understand that they are watching something worth watching. Jon is 17, when the court begins to notice what Barristan noticed years before. The comparison is not sought, it is simply inevitable. Courts are machines for comparison. Every face measured against every other face, every bearing weighed against every bearing. And the comparison between Jon and Joffrey becomes one that no amount of careful politics can suppress once it begins. Joffrey, at 13, is already acquiring the particular qualities that will define him. The petulant mouth, the casual cruelty that he mistakes for authority, the eyes that shine brightest when someone beneath him flinches. He rides well enough. He handles a blade with the competence of a boy who has received instruction from good teachers and ignored most of what they said. When he crosses the practice yard, the knights of the Kingsguard watch him with the specific blankness of men who have learned to keep their faces neutral. When Jon crosses the same yard, they watch differently. This is the problem. This is the thing that begins to pull at the threads. Minor lords notice. They're paid to notice. Or rather, their survival depends upon noticing. And what they notice is simple and terrible in its simplicity. The king's bastard moves through King's Landing like a man who belongs there, and the crown prince moves through King's Landing like a man who is afraid he does not. These observations travel. They travel through solar rooms and down long corridors and into the hushed corners of feasts where wine loosens the discretion of men who should know better. Among the small folk, the rumors acquire a different texture, cruder, more direct, stripped of the political language that the lords use to insulate themselves from the implications of what they are saying. The people of Flea Bottom do not speak in whispers about succession law. They speak plainly. They say, the king loves the bastard more. They say, the bastard fights like a king ought to fight. They say it the way common people always say dangerous things, without fully understanding what those words, once loose in the world, are capable of doing. Varys understands. Varys always understands. He adds the information to his web with the methodical care of a man who has long since learned that the most consequential intelligence is rarely the intelligence that announces itself as consequential. A rumor about a bastard's grip on a training sword. The specific way a group of Lannister guardsmen falls quiet when Jon passes. The number of times, carefully tallied, that Robert has called Jon to his side at table when the court is watching. These are small pieces. Varys has always known that the most dangerous structures are built from small pieces, assembled slowly, and that by the time anyone can see the shape of what is being built, the foundation is already immovable. He watches Jon with the patient attention of a man who has learned the price of watching too late, and he begins quietly to make inquiries, not about Jon's future, not yet, about Jon's past, about a woman's name that the king will not speak, about a journey north that Robert took before a rebellion, and the particular quality of grief that still lives in the king's face when he drinks enough to stop hiding it. Jon himself does not know he is being watched, or rather, he knows in the way that any young man raised in a court knows that observation is the condition of his existence. What he does not know is the weight attached to this particular watching. He has grown accustomed to being the king's bastard, which is a position that carries its own specific textures of privilege and shame, attention, and isolation. He carries the name Snow still. Robert has never moved to change it, though there have been moments, late evenings, the king's large hand on his shoulder, a long silence, when Jon has believed or wanted to believe, that the question was near the surface. But it is not the question of his name that occupies him now. It is the question of his mother. He has asked Robert. Robert deflects with the particular grace of a man who has had years to perfect his evasions. A sigh, a cup raised, a change of subject executed so smoothly that Jon is 3 sentences into a different conversation before he realizes the first one ended without answer. There is grief there, real grief, the kind that does not perform itself, but simply inhabits a person, like weather inhabits a valley. Jon has learned to read it. He cannot yet read what lies beneath it. He asks Ned during the visits north, those rare and careful journeys that Robert sends him on, with the explanation that a man should know the north if he means to rule anything in it someday. Ned receives him at Winterfell with warmth that never quite resolves into ease, with eyes that carry something Jon has spent years trying to name. It is not shame. He has seen shame in men's eyes, and it does not look like this. It is something older and more structural, a grief built into the architecture of Ned Stark's face rather than sitting on its surface. When Jon asks about his mother, Ned's jaw tightens by precisely the amount that a man's jaw tightens when he is holding something in with the full force of his will. He always answers carefully. He always says she was a woman Robert loved. He always says she died, and it was a loss the king never recovered from. He never says her name. Jon has noticed, and kept noticing, that Ned never says her name. Not once. Not in all the years and all the carefully navigated conversations. A bastard's mother might go unnamed out of shame or discretion, but the quality of silence around this particular absence does not feel like shame. It feels like protection. Jon is standing in the practice yard on a gray morning when this thought arrives in its fullest form, and he stops mid-drill without meaning to, and Barristan, who misses nothing, stops across from him and waits. The old knight has that quality, patience shaped into a kind of inquiry. He does not ask what Jon is thinking. He simply waits, and the waiting itself asks the question. Jon says slowly, "There is something Ned Stark will not tell me." Barristan says nothing for a long moment. Then he says, "There are things men hold in trust for other men that are not theirs to release." Jon looks at him. The words are careful. Too careful. The specific carefulness of a man who knows more than he is saying and has chosen with full deliberation the precise distance between silence and disclosure. Jon has been trained in the reading of stances and the weight of stillness, and what he reads now in Barristan Selmy's face is not the blankness of ignorance. He opens his mouth to ask the question that has been building in him for years, the question underneath all the other questions, the one about the quality of grief in Ned Stark's eyes, and the name that no one will speak, and the way Barristan himself sometimes watches him with that particular expression that Jon cannot quite name. And the door opens. It is a servant, pale-faced and breathless, the kind of pale that precedes catastrophe. He does not speak immediately. He steadies himself against the frame, and in that half-second of steadying, something in the air of King's Landing shifts. Jon feels it before the words arrive. Barristan feels it too. His posture changes, the stillness of inquiry becoming the stillness of a soldier reading terrain. The king has been brought in from the hunt. The king is dying. What is said beyond that barely registers. The specifics, the boar, the wound, the hours of rough transport through the wood, arrive in fragments, each one absorbed and filed with the terrible efficiency of minds that have learned to function inside shock. Jon moves. Barristan moves beside him. The question that had been building for years, the one underneath all the other questions, retreats. It does not disappear. It goes still, the way fire goes still before a wind arrives to decide its direction. The chambers smell of blood and tallow. Robert Baratheon lies at the center of the room the way great things lie when they are ending. Enormous in stillness, diminished in a way that has nothing to do with size. He is a man who has always occupied space loudly, whose presence filled rooms before his body arrived. That quality is leaving him now, and what remains is simply flesh and the enormous effort of continuing to draw air. Cersei is not present. This is noted. This is filed. Ned Stark stands at the bedside, and the expression on his face is one Jon recognizes from childhood. The particular grief of a man who is carrying more than he can name, and has been carrying it so long that the weight has become structural, load-bearing, impossible to set down without the entire architecture collapsing. He looks up when Jon enters. Something crosses his face. He steps back. Robert's eyes find Jon the way the eyes of dying men find what they are looking for. With a directness that has shed all social negotiation, all the protective layers of power and performance, leaving only the essential thing beneath. He does not speak immediately. He looks. Then he says, his voice stripped of its usual thunder to something quieter and more devastating. I loved you as my son. Jon does not move. Robert's hand lifts, fractionally. Jon takes it. The grip is weaker than it should be, and this too is filed, this diminishment, because the mind does not stop cataloging even in moments that demand it cease. Robert says, you were protected by a lie greater than you know, greater than I know. There is a truth. He stops, starts again. There are men who would have. He does not finish the sentence. He does not need to. Jon can feel Ned Stark behind him, can feel the precise quality of Ned's stillness, the same specific carefulness he had recognized moments ago in Barristan's face, but multiplied now, intensified. A man standing at the edge of an enormous precipice and holding himself very still so as not to look down. Robert looks past Jon. He looks at Ned. Something passes between them that Jon cannot fully read, not for lack of skill, but because this particular exchange is encoded in years he was not present for, a shared history of grief and war, and a woman named Lyanna who exists for Jon only as the shape of her absence. What passes between Ned Stark and Robert Baratheon in that moment has the quality of a last accounting, a settling of debts too complicated to speak aloud. Robert's grip loosens. He does not speak again. What happens in the hours that follow has a momentum that bypasses ordinary time. Joffrey ascends. This is not a surprise. This is the machinery that has been set in motion for years, oiled quietly in chambers Jon was never invited into, by hands that understood the endgame long before the game appeared to begin. Cersei's hands. Always Cersei's hands, working at the mechanisms behind the visible surface of things, patient in the specific way of people who know they cannot move openly and so have made an art of moving otherwise. The decree comes with the morning. Jon Waters, the name stripped away before the ink is dry, the acknowledgement dissolved, the fraud declared in language so absolute and so immediate that it carries the signature of something prepared well in advance, waiting only for the moment of its release. Baseborn imposter, pretender, subject to arrest and the king's justice. He hears it and understands immediately that Cersei has been waiting for Robert to die, not merely to protect Joffrey's secret, but to eliminate the one complication that Robert's grief had kept alive and close to the throne. Jon himself, the boy that Robert had held like evidence of something he could not articulate. She had been patient, she had been meticulous, and now the king who had protected him was cooling in the chamber down the hall, and the doors of King's Landing were becoming walls. It is Tyrion who comes first. This is unexpected. Tyrion moves through the corridors with the particular unhurried certainty of a man who has already calculated the exits and finds the situation, if not comfortable, then at least interesting. He looks at Jon and says, conversationally as though commenting on weather, "You have perhaps 2 hours before the gold cloaks are organized enough to be a genuine problem." Barristan arrives at the same moment from the opposite corridor. Neither man appears surprised to find the other there. Jon looks between them. He looks at Ned Stark, who stands at the edge of the room holding the shattered pieces of a secret that is no longer entirely his to keep. The question is rising again. The one about grief and names and the specific expression in Barristan's eyes. And now Ned can feel it coming. They ride north through the night, and the night does not relent. The roads narrow as they climb away from King's Landing, and the further they travel from the city, the more the air changes. Colder, cleaner, carrying the particular silence of a world that does not yet know what has been set in motion. Jon rides without speaking. Tyrion keeps pace beside him for a time, watching the boy's profile against the dark tree line, that careful measuring look of a man filing observations for later use. Barristan rides at the rear, straight-backed and silent as carved stone, and if he feels the weight of what he carries, it shows only in the deliberate steadiness of his hands upon the reins. Ned Stark does not speak either. Not yet. He knows the shape of what is coming. He has known it in some form for 17 years. The conversation he would someday have to have, the door he would someday have to open, and he has rehearsed it in his mind 1,000 times without ever finding words that feel adequate to the task. Some truths do not survive translation. They exist fully only in the moment of their telling, and then they change everything they touch. They reach Winterfell before the crown's riders. This matters. This is the margin Tyrion calculated, and the margin holds. The gray walls rise against a sky still dark, and the gates open before they even call out. Robb Stark has been watching from the ramparts, a young lord learning the particular vigilance of uncertain times. He comes down to meet them in the courtyard with the gravity of a man older than his years, and he looks at Jon, and then at his father, and he reads something in Ned's face that makes him go very still. Ned takes Jon into his solar. The fire is already burning. He closes the door. What Ned tells him in that room reshapes the architecture of Jon's entire existence. He begins with Lyanna, not the monument, not the name carved into grief, but the girl herself, her will, the particular quality of her courage that even Ned still speaks of with something approaching awe. He tells him about the Tower of Joy and the men who died there and the sound she made when she pressed the newborn into his arms. He tells him about the secret marriage, trueborn, witnessed, sealed, and the name that was spoken at a mother's insistence with her last breath. Aegon, the sixth of that name, son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, the heir that history swallowed. Jon does not speak for a long time after. The fire pops and settles. Outside, the sounds of Winterfell continue. Boots on stone, horses in the stable yard. the ordinary machinery of a household. And Jon sits inside all of it, like a man who has just discovered the ground beneath him is not ground at all. He had not known he was searching for something. He understands now that he has been searching his entire life. The question he finally asks is not about thrones or succession, or the legal architecture of legitimacy. It is simpler than that and harder. He asks if his mother was afraid. Ned closes his eyes for a moment. No, he says, she was not afraid. She was very clear. She knew exactly what she was doing, and she did it anyway. Jon absorbs this, files it somewhere deep and private. Then he straightens in his chair with the particular composure of a young man learning to carry a new and very heavy thing. When they emerge from the solar, the northern lords are already gathering. Ned had sent ravens before they left King's Landing. Men who remember their debts and their grievances come quickly when the Starks call, and they come to Winterfell now from their castles and their holdfasts with the grim purposefulness of men who have been waiting, without quite knowing it, for exactly this moment. Robb stands at the head of the great hall with a lord's bearing and something fiercer behind his eyes. He has been told. He stands beside Jon the way a man stands beside his brother, which is what Jon is in every way that has ever mattered. The northern lords hear the truth in pieces, and then all at once, and the reaction moves through the hall like weather. Not shock exactly, but a deep recognition, the feeling of a thing suspected finally confirmed. The North had been bled. They knew who held the knife. And here stands a true-born king with Stark blood in his veins, and they are being asked to decide what the North remembers. Jon speaks against the title. He speaks with the measured pragmatism of a young man shaped by Barristan's honor and Tyrion's careful arithmetic, arguing that war costs more than men account for before it begins, that peace, if achievable, is worth more than a crown. He is persuasive. He is calm. Several lords are listening. Then the ravens arrive. They come in sequence, each one worse than the last, and the final one carries the news from King's Landing in plain, brutal terms. Ned Stark, Lord of Winterfell, Warden of the North, has been arrested on charges of treason by order of the Queen Regent. The charges are fabricated. The conclusion is written in the architecture of the accusation itself. Jon reads the letter once. He sets it down on the table with great care, as if placing something fragile. Then he picks it up and reads it again. He does not speak immediately. The hall watches him. Something is settling across his features. Not rage, not grief, but something colder and more durable than either. The calculation of a man who has just understood that peace requires a partner willing to choose it, and that no such partner sits the throne. He looks up at Robb. Robb is already looking back at him. The letter goes into a lockbox. The lockbox is sealed with 2 keys, one held by Jon and one by Robb, and neither man speaks the obvious thing aloud: that the Lord of Winterfell is now a hostage, that the game has shifted from political to existential, that the time for ravens carrying careful arguments has nearly passed. Nearly, but not entirely. There is still one move left on this particular corner of the board, and Jon sees it with the clarity of a man who has spent his life learning to find the small doors that larger men overlooked. He sends for Barristan Selmy before dawn. The old knight comes without ceremony, as men of genuine honor always do. He has slept little, which is evident in the set of his jaw, but his bearing is unchanged. The bearing of a man who decided long ago that dignity was not contingent on comfort. Jon lays it out plainly, not as a command, not even as a request, as a question between two men who understand what is at stake and what it costs. He places Ned's letter on the table between them. He places the sealed documents bearing the testimony of the Maester who attended Lyanna's final hours. He places his own hand beside them, palm down, flat on the wood, as if steadying something that might otherwise drift away. Barristan reads each document in silence. He takes his time. He does not rush, because a man who rushes through evidence of this magnitude is not reading it. He is performing the act of reading, which is a different thing entirely. When he finishes, he looks up. His eyes carry something that might be grief, and might be recognition, and might be both at once. He says that he served her father. He says it quietly, with the full weight of what that sentence contains, buried somewhere beneath its surface. Jon says nothing. Barristan says that he would cross to Essos, that he would carry the documents himself, that if this woman is what the evidence suggests she is, blood of Robert's blood by a different path, heir to a name that the realm has not yet finished reckoning with, then she deserves to receive this truth from a man she already knows, a man who has already chosen her over corruption once before. He does not frame it as sacrifice. He frames it as the next logical step, which is how men of his particular temperament frame most things that would break lesser people. Jon says that there is a ship, that it has been waiting for 3 days in a harbor that asks fewer questions than most. Barristan almost smiles. He says that Jon thinks the way Ned Stark acts, and means it as the highest possible praise. Across the narrow sea, when Barristan Selmy walks into the presence of Daenerys Targaryen, carrying a sealed chest and the particular expression of a man who has crossed an ocean to deliver something that cannot be delivered lightly, she knows before he speaks that the world has changed shape. She has grown accustomed to the shape of the old world, the one that exiled her, that burned her family, that reduced a dynasty to 2 scattered survivors clinging to borrowed time and borrowed ships. She has been preparing to reclaim that world. What Barristan brings her is something stranger and in some ways more difficult. The possibility that the world has already partially reckoned with itself, and that the young man on the other side of the water is not an obstacle to her purpose, but an extension of it. She reads the documents slowly. The dragons move at the edges of the room, restless in the way that dragons are always restless when something enormous is in motion. Barristan watches her read. He has spent his life watching powerful people receive difficult information, and he has developed the ability to read the architecture of a face the way other men read maps, understanding where the high ground is, where the soft approaches lie, where a wall is about to give. What he sees in her face is not the rage of a dynastic rival confronted with competition. It is something more complex and more promising. It is the expression of someone doing arithmetic of the kind that changes everything that follows. She looks up and asks if he trusts this Jon Snow. Barristan tells her that he trusts the man Ned Stark raised, and he trusts the blood that runs in his veins, and he trusts that a young man who sends an old knight across a sea with evidence rather than an army is a man who understands that what is built together holds longer than what is taken by force. He does not finish the thought all the way. He does not need to. In the north, the ravens are already flying. Ned Stark writes from his cell in King's Landing with hands that are steadier than they have any right to be. The letters go out in sequence, carried by birds trained to towers from the neck to the mountain passes of the Vale, each one signed in his own hand, each one carrying the same essential declaration, in plain language stripped of courtly softening. He names his ward, he names his blood, he writes the words that cannot be unwritten once they reach the eyes of a lord with a garrison at his back. The Vale moves because of a letter written weeks before Ned's arrest, a letter to his sister by law, to Lysa Arryn in her mountain fastness, a letter that Ned had written with the care of a man who understood that contingencies are not pessimism, but responsibility. Lysa is complicated. Lysa is frightened in ways that make her dangerous, and in ways that make her manageable, which is a difficult combination to navigate. But the agreement holds. The moon door remains shut. The Knights of the Vale descend from the Eyrie by roads that most armies would not dare attempt, roads carved into cliff faces above drops that do not forgive mistakes, and they move with the particular discipline of men who have spent their lives learning those roads and trust them the way a sailor trusts a current. Jon rides at the head of the combined column as they turn south toward the Twins. The morning light is the color of cold iron. Beside him, Robb's direwolf moves through the mist at the road's edge, gray and silent as a held breath. The column stretches behind them for miles, the banners of the north and the Vale moving in the same slow wind. And somewhere ahead of them, the crossroads of every decision that has brought them here is resolving itself into a single inevitable point. A rider comes fast from the south and pulls his horse hard enough to throw stones from the road. He has news from the Twins. He has news of Lord Frey, who has received the Raven, who has read Ned Stark's letter, who is... The rider searches for the precise word and cannot find one, deliberating. Jon looks at the road ahead. He asks how long it will take to reach the Twins at this pace. The rider says 2 days, perhaps less if the weather holds. Jon nods once, slowly, the way a man nods when an answer confirms something he already knew. He does not increase the pace. He does not slow it. The column continues as it was, steady and relentless as water finding its level. And somewhere far to the south, in a cell that smells of damp stone and old ambition, Ned Stark finishes his last letter, folds it with care, and waits to hear the wings. The Twins open without a siege. Lord Frey deliberates for less than a day before the weight of what is coming resolves itself into something even his famously calculating mind cannot argue against. He has read Ned Stark's letter. He has looked at his own walls and counted his own men, and then looked south toward King's Landing, where Joffrey sits, and north toward the column of northern steel that does not hurry and does not stop. The math is not complicated. By the time Jon's vanguard reaches the southern bank, the gates are already moving. It is not loyalty. It is not love. It is the oldest political calculation in the world, dressed in the colors of survival. Jon crosses the bridge and does not pause to celebrate. He thanks Lord Frey with the precise warmth the moment requires. Enough to acknowledge the surrender, not enough to suggest it was unexpected. And the column flows through like water through a gate that was always meant to open. 2 days behind them, ravens are already fanning out across the riverlands. A lord has bent the knee, then another. Then 3 more in a single morning, their Meister's seals pressed into wax before the ink on the previous letter is dry. The realm is watching the board, and the board is shifting. Daenerys lands at Dragonstone on a gray morning when the sea is the color of hammered iron, and what she brings with her changes the texture of the war entirely. The Unsullied march off the ships in formations so precise, they look less like an army and more like a single vast intention made flesh. Drogon circles above the castle once, twice, a third time, and the garrison watching from the battlements does not wait to be asked. They open the gates before the first Unsullied unit reaches the causeway. Some things do not require negotiation. Some things are simply a reckoning arriving on schedule. The Lannister forces are stretched between two directions and a realm increasingly unwilling to die for a boy king whose cruelties have become common knowledge from the reach to the neck. Soldiers fight for many things: coin, fear, honor, the man standing next to them. But very few soldiers fight well for a cause that has stopped believing in itself. Word travels faster than armies. It always does. And the word traveling through the Lannister host is that the lords are going quiet, one by one, the way candles go out in a room when the window opens. Cersei sees all of this from the heights of the Red Keep and makes her final calculation. It is not a strategy born from strength. It is a strategy born from desperation, dressed as cleverness, which is perhaps the most dangerous kind, because the woman executing it is genuinely brilliant, and a brilliant mind in full panic is capable of extraordinary things. She releases the documents, all of them, the annulment, the marriage, the witnesses. She puts Jon Snow's true parentage before the realm, not as a secret uncovered, but as a weapon deployed, certain that the name Targaryen will do what her armies cannot, that the lords who are wavering will recoil from dragon blood, from a foreign line, from the ghost of Aerys and the madness that ended a dynasty. What she does not calculate, what she cannot allow herself to calculate, because to do so would be to admit the game is already lost, is what the documents actually say. Not merely that Jon Snow is a Targaryen, but that he is the legitimate son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, born of a secret marriage, a child of the North and the dragon in equal measure. He is not a foreign invader wearing a northern face. He is both. He is the realm's own contradiction, resolved into a single person, and in a world that has spent 15 years telling itself a story about Robert's rebellion and what it meant, the revelation lands not as a scandal, but as something stranger and more powerful. It lands as a completion. The lords who read the documents in their camps and their solars do not recoil. They go quiet for a long moment, the way men go quiet when something they did not expect turns out to make more sense than everything they already believed. And then they write their ravens. The Blackwater Rush decides what is left to decide. Jon commands the ground forces on the northern bank with the same unhurried precision that has defined every step of this campaign. No wasted motion, no theatrical gestures, every decision made before the moment demands it. Across the water, the Lannister fleet holds its formation in the way a formation holds when the men inside it are already calculating the distance to shore. Drogon comes out of the east with the sun behind him, which may or may not be coincidence, and the Lannister fleet does not break so much as dissolve, each ship making its own private decision at roughly the same moment. The ground battle is brief, decisive, the kind of engagement that historians will describe in a single paragraph, not because it lacked significance, but because significance, when it arrives fully formed, requires very little explanation. Joffrey watches from the walls of King's Landing, and then he does not. He retreats into the Red Keep, while the city below him makes its own calculations, and the doors close behind him, and for a long moment, the Red Keep is very quiet. Jaime Lannister stands in the corridor outside the king's chambers with his golden hand and his old sword and the full weight of every oath he has ever broken, pressing against the one oath he has never quite found a way to keep. The oath to the realm itself, the one no ceremony ever names, but every knight understands. He can hear Joffrey inside. He can hear what Joffrey is ordering done to the servants who bring him news he does not want. He does not knock. He simply opens the door. The door opens, and what happens behind it will be debated for generations. What is not debated is what happens next. What happens when the gates of King's Landing swing wide, not under siege, but under terms, not under fire, but under the deliberate and unhurried authority of a young man who has decided with great care exactly what kind of arrival this will be. Jon rides in the middle, not at the front, where conquerors position themselves for the paintings and the songs, not at the rear, where the cautious and the uncertain linger. The middle, flanked on his left by Robb Stark and on his right by Barristan Selmy, whose presence alone communicates something that no herald's proclamation could fully articulate. That this moment has been recognized by men who have stood at the center of power long enough to know what legitimacy actually looks like and have chosen to stand here. The orders issued to his forces are simple. Harm no citizen. Offer terms to every lord still holding. Let the city watch the army enter and find nothing to fear in what it sees. It is a calculated mercy, this restraint, but it is not merely calculation. Jon understands in the way that Robert never quite did, and Joffrey could not have begun to comprehend, that a city which surrenders its fear does not require generations of soldiers to hold. The small folk of King's Landing have been ruled by terror for long enough that the simple absence of it feels, to them, like something approaching grace. They line the streets and they watch, and some of them begin, quietly, to understand what they are witnessing. Loyalty, the durable kind, does not announce itself, it accumulates. By the time the procession reaches the gates of the Red Keep, Jon has earned more of it in a single afternoon than Joffrey managed across the full and grinding length of his reign. Joffrey is no longer a problem requiring solution. Jaime Lannister has attended to that with the quiet, terrible efficiency of a man who has finally chosen which oath matters most. The details are sparse and will remain so, by common agreement among those who understand that some moments serve the realm better as silences than as stories. What matters is the throne room and what happens inside it. Cersei Lannister stands at the center of that great hall and does not look broken. This is perhaps the most dangerous thing about her. She has always understood that bearing is itself a form of power, and she holds hers now with the practiced stillness of someone who has spent a lifetime learning to project strength from positions of weakness. She has lost. She knows it with the full clarity of a mind that has never been slow. But she watches Jon approach, and her eyes are calculating still, because they do not know how to be anything else. Jon stops before her, and there is a long silence in which the court around them holds its breath. Everyone present understands what this moment could be. The woman who ordered Ned Stark's death, the woman who corrupted the succession, who stripped a true-born son of his name, who bent a kingdom toward her children's survival with a ruthlessness that left ruin in its wake. The throne room has seen executions before. The logic of the moment seems to be building toward one. Jon does not give them what the logic demands. He sentences her to Dragonstone, a sept on the eastern end of that ancient island, removed from every court, every corridor, every conversation where power is brokered or influence extended. She will have comfort. She will have silence. She will have, he says, exactly as much as she granted Ned Stark in the Black Cells, and no one misses the weight of that particular arithmetic. She will have her life. The court exhales in something that is not quite relief and not quite disappointment, but exists precisely between them in that uncertain territory where mercy announces itself and no one is entirely sure what to make of it. What it signals is this: the man who now stands before the Iron Throne intends to be a different kind of king than any this hall has seen in recent memory. Not soft. The campaign has demonstrated that clearly enough, but capable of restraint in the moment when restraint costs something. Robert would not have granted it. Joffrey could not have imagined it. Jon grants it and moves on, as though the decision required nothing, though everyone in the room understands it required everything. And then the doors at the far end of the throne room open, and Ned Stark walks in. He has been in the Black Cells long enough that the light of the hall seems to cost him something. He moves carefully, the way men move when pain has become so familiar it has simply become the texture of existence. He is thinner. The dignity is intact. That is the first thing, the thing that matters. But it is worn thin in places, stretched over something that has clearly been tested. His eyes find Jon across the length of that great hall, and for a moment neither of them moves. The court is absolutely still. Jon has not sat upon the Iron Throne. He stands before it, between it and the room, as though he has not yet decided what the throne means or what he intends it to mean. When Ned begins to lower himself, slowly, painfully, with the full deliberate weight of a man who has spent his entire life understanding what it means to kneel and why, Jon is already moving, crossing the distance between them at something closer to urgency than a king is supposed to show. He reaches Ned before the knee touches the floor. His hand finds the older man's arm, and he pulls him back upright, and they stand together very close. And Jon does not speak immediately because some things resist language in the moment they most need it, and the silence between them holds more than words could carry. Ned looks at him, truly looks at him, the way you look at something you have kept safe for so long that the keeping became indistinguishable from the thing itself. His eyes move across Jon's face with the slow, undisguised relief of a man who is cataloging proof. Proof that the secret held, that the boy survived, that the promise made to a dying woman in a tower at the end of a war has arrived, intact. At this moment, Jon sees it, all of it. He has suspected and wondered and half known for years, and now the throne room is full of court and witnesses and political consequence, and none of it matters as much as the expression on Ned Stark's face, which is not the face of a lord before his king. It is the face of something older and more complicated than that. And Jon's hand has not let go of his arm, and the silence between them is still holding. And outside the great doors of the Red Keep, the city is already beginning to recalibrate itself around the shape of what comes next. And somewhere beneath all of it, beneath the politics and the bloodlines and the long machinery of consequence, something very simple is occurring in the space between two men who have never once spoken plainly, about the thing that has always stood between them. Ned opens his mouth. The first word begins to form, and Jon is already watching his face with the particular stillness of someone who has been waiting a very long time to hear it. The word, when it finally comes, is not a title. It is not a formal address. It is not the careful diplomatic language of a lord standing before the man who is about to become his king. It is simply a name. The name Ned Stark chose for a child he carried down from a burning tower while the last war of dragons was still cooling in the ash. And when he speaks it, the throne room seems to contract slightly around the two of them, as if the room itself is acknowledging that what is happening in this moment is more real than anything the Iron Throne has witnessed in a generation. Jon does not move. He simply receives the name the way a man receives something he feared he might never be given. And then at last, the silence between them breaks, not into words, but into the simpler grammar of a hand placed once firmly on a shoulder, and the thing that has always stood between them steps aside and lets them through. What Ned Stark says in that throne room, no record will fully capture. The full weight of the story, a dying woman's wish, a promise sealed in grief, a lie maintained for years at incalculable personal cost, is spoken only between them. What the court observes is that the Lord of Winterfell and the man who is about to be crowned speak quietly for a long time, and that when they separate, neither of them is precisely the same as he was before. The court does not need to know the details. The court can see the shape of it in Ned's face, which has finally, after years of holding something impossible inside it, released the tension of that particular burden. He looks, those closest to him will later say, like a man who has set down a stone he has carried so long, he had forgotten it was not part of him. The coronation is held the following morning in the great sept of Baelor, and Jon Aegon Targaryen, sixth of his name, is crowned in full view of the city he now leads. But before the crown is placed, before the words are spoken, Jon does something no coronation tradition has ever required. He pauses at the top of the steps and speaks the name of Robert Baratheon, not as a warning, not as a contrast, but as an honoring. He speaks of a man who took a boy with no claim and no safety and wrapped him in the protection of a royal name, who sat across from that boy at 100 feasts and taught him, in his loud and imperfect way, what it meant to be seen by the world. He does not say that Robert knew. He does not need to. What he says is that the realm owes Robert Baratheon a debt it never calculated. That had the king turned that child away, had he suspected or doubted or done what many men in his position might have done, Westeros would now have no one standing on these steps. The realm sits with that for a moment. The truth of it is not comfortable, but it is true. He is crowned. The city erupts, and then the work begins. The council Jon builds is unlike anything the Red Keep has housed. Tyrion Lannister takes the chain of the hand with the careful, contained satisfaction of a man who has spent his entire life being underestimated and has finally been handed the instrument through which that underestimation will be corrected. He is brilliant and precise, and he understands the machinery of the realm the way a master understands his craft, not through admiration, but through intimate knowledge of where it breaks. Ned Stark takes the wardenship of the North and an honored seat at council, not as an executor of the king's will, but as the elder statesman the realm needs, the man whose stubborn insistence on honesty has always been both his greatest liability and his most irreplaceable quality. Barristan Selmy commands a Kingsguard reformed from its foundations, not sworn to the person of the king, but to a written oath of loyalty to the realm itself, a distinction that sounds simple and carries enormous consequence, because it means that the Kingsguard exists now as something more durable than the man who wears the crown. And around the small council table, for the first time in the history of Westeros, there sit elected voices from the major regions of the realm, not lords appointed by the crown, but representatives chosen from below, a mechanism so unusual that half the old nobility regards it with undisguised suspicion, and the other half with something that might, if they let themselves feel it fully, be called hope. His first address is given from the steps of the Red Keep at midday, with the city assembled before him, and the autumn sky pressing down in that particular flat gray way that always feels in Westeros like a rehearsal for winter. He speaks of ice and fire, not as enemies, not as the opposing forces that every song and story has always made them, the cold that kills and the flame that burns. He speaks of them as the two things that make life in this world possible at all. The ice that teaches endurance, the silence of the long winter that strips everything down to what is essential and burns away what is not, and the fire, not the fire that destroys, but the fire in the hands of someone standing a night watch, the fire in the hall where the frightened and the cold press together against the dark. Ice and fire, he says, are not what kill you. They are what make you. They are what Westeros is made of, down to its bones. And then he speaks of the wall. He speaks carefully, and he speaks from a place that no king before him has ever spoken from, which is the place of someone who has actually stood on the other side of it. He does not describe what he saw in the way a man tells a frightening story. He describes it the way a man describes a mathematical certainty, the way an engineer describes a structural problem that must be addressed because the alternative is not defeat, but collapse. The Night's Watch will be funded. The passes will be sealed and reinforced. The knowledge of what waits in the long dark will be written and kept and taught to every generation that follows, not as legend, but as history. Because legend fades, and history properly maintained does not. He alone among all the kings who ever sat the Iron Throne has stood in that shadow. He will not let the realm forget again. The city is quiet when he finishes, not the quiet of indifference or confusion, but the quality of quiet that falls when something has been said that cannot be unsaid, when a truth has entered a room and rearranged everything slightly. The crown sits on his head. The wind moves across the steps of the Red Keep. Ned Stark stands to his left with the particular stillness of a man watching something he helped bring into the world reach the place it was always moving toward. And the expression on his face is not pride exactly, though it contains pride, and it is not grief exactly, though it contains that too. It is something older than both. The expression of a man who made a promise at the edge of everything and kept it across years and silence and enormous personal cost, and who is now watching that promise become the shape of a different world. This is what one divergence does. One king, at the edge of a war, looks at a child he did not father and decides the child is his, not for strategy, not for legacy, not for any reason that history would call rational. He decides it because the child is there and the child is small and the child has no one else, and whatever else Robert Baratheon was. And he was many things, not all of them admirable, not all of them kind. He was a man who could not turn away from something that needed protecting. That is the thread. That is the single, quiet, almost accidental thread from which all of this is woven. A war ends, a tower falls, a king claims a boy, and years later, standing at the end of a very long road, the boy who was claimed becomes the king the realm has been waiting for. Made of ice and fire both, carrying both inheritances, belonging fully to neither and entirely to both, and governing at last with the understanding that the crown is not a prize at the end of a war. It is a weight. It is a responsibility. It is the thing you carry so that the people beneath it do not have to. Outside the Red Keep, the city settles into the particular quiet of a world that has just changed shape and is beginning, slowly, to understand what it has become. The crown sits, the council convenes, the wall stands, and somewhere in the deep logic of what might have been, the shape of what is holds and holds and holds, complete at last. That is the end of today's story. If you enjoyed this alternate history, please consider subscribing because there is a new Westeros story waiting for you every day. Thank you for being here, and I will see you tomorrow.